The story unfolds on a ravaged Earth, a planet nearly devoid of life. A series of catastrophic events has led to the annihilation of 99% of all living beings, humans, animals, birds, and even aquatic creatures. Those who remain alive are barely surviving, their existence overshadowed by the inevitability of extinction. 7 years ago, the world was introduced to a mysterious and deadly disease. Initially dismissed as a minor threat, the illness gradually spiraled out of control, devastating ecosystems and societies alike. Now, Earth is nothing but a barren wasteland, its once thriving landscapes reduced to desolate, lifeless stretches. Amidst this devastation is Chris, a former scientist clinging to hope. His days are consumed by desperate attempts to find fertile soil, his last-ditch effort to grow crops and ensure survival. While scouring the wasteland, Chris stumbles upon the carcass of a dead animal. Using his portable scanner, he confirms what he already suspects. The creature, like countless others, fell victim to the same disease. Saddened but undeterred, Chris collects a sample of the soil and returns to his camp, where his wife Anna is waiting for him. Anna, however, is in a fragile state. She has been infected with the disease that claimed their young son 7 years ago. Though Chris has managed to keep her alive, the toll is evident. Her condition worsens with each passing day. Back at the camp, Chris meticulously places the soil he gathered into a vial and begins cultivating a special strain of plants. Over years of tireless research, he discovered that these plants could produce a makeshift antidote. While not a cure, it slows the disease's progression, buying precious time. Chris administers a fresh dose of the antidote to Anna, stabilizing her for the time being. Knowing that he needs richer soil to grow more plants, Chris decides to venture further afield the next day, taking Anna with him. Their journey takes them through a bleak, unforgiving landscape. Along the way, they encounter the lifeless body of another traveler. Hoping to find food or supplies, Chris searches the man's belongings, but discovers only an empty gun. Like so many others, the traveler bears the telltale lesions of the disease. The sight is a grim reminder of the fate that looms over everyone. As night falls, Anna's health takes a sudden turn for the worse. Desperate to save her, Chris hurriedly begins preparing another dose of the antidote using the limited resources they have. Just as he finishes, he notices something unusual in the distance, a faint flicker of light cutting through the darkness. In the desolate, post-apocalyptic world where survival meant killing or being killed, Chris and Anna had managed to hold on to their humanity. Fearing for their lives, Chris immediately grabbed the empty gun he had scavenged earlier and raised it defensively, stammering that they had no food or supplies and begging the man to leave. To Chris's surprise, the stranger didn't attack. Instead, he calmly placed a bag of food on the ground and stepped back, signaling that he meant no harm. Cautiously, Chris accepted the bag, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he and Anna ate a proper meal. The stranger introduced himself as Dmitri and explained that he had been watching Chris for some time. He'd seen Chris create the antidote from plants and believed that Chris had the knowledge necessary to assist him in an ambitious plan to escape their doomed world. Dmitri revealed that he had discovered a way to leave this timeline and enter a parallel universe, one where Earth had not yet fallen into ruin. However, the process required someone with Chris's expertise to complete. Dmitri urged Chris to join him immediately, but Chris refused to leave Anna behind. Understanding Chris's devotion, Dmitri promised to return in a few days and departed into the night. The next morning, Chris and Anna continued their search for fertile soil, but Anna's health had deteriorated rapidly. Realizing she couldn't travel any further, Chris set up camp to tend to her. Exhausted, he fell asleep beside her. When he awoke at dawn, he discovered to his horror that Anna had succumbed to the disease during the night. Heartbroken, Chris carried her lifeless body to a nearby seashore, a place Anna had always loved, and buried her there with a heavy heart. As Chris turned to leave, his foot was suddenly caught in a hidden trap. Trapped and in excruciating pain, he screamed for help, but no one was there to hear him. Slowly, darkness overtook him as he slipped into unconsciousness. When Chris awoke, he found himself in a completely unfamiliar place. The air was clean, the sky vibrant, and the land lush with thriving trees and plants, flora that hadn't existed on Earth for years. Staggering to his feet, he noticed people around him, healthy, vibrant individuals living ordinary lives, a stark contrast to the apocalyptic wasteland he had left behind. Confused and overwhelmed, Chris began to question if this was real or some kind of fever dream. Desperate for answers, Chris made his way to Anna's office, a place she used to work in before the world fell apart. When he arrived, he froze in shock. There, sitting at her desk, was Anna, alive, healthy, and radiant. But what shook Chris even more was the sight of another version of himself, standing beside her, deep in conversation. Chris, startled and overwhelmed, started running back as fast as he could. While fleeing, he noticed one of the baggers he had seen earlier behaving strangely. The man appeared to be affected by the same disease that had been causing chaos. Chris wanted to ask what was happening, but before he could, a sharp pain shot through his injured leg, the same one he had heard after getting caught in a trap earlier. Suddenly, everything around him faded, and he found himself waking up in a completely different place. Chris's eyes opened, and he realized he was tied to a bench. Wires were attached to his head, and the room felt eerily quiet. To his shock, the person standing in front of him was Dmitri, the same man who had given him food on that fateful night. Dmitri had a serious look on his face as he began to explain everything. Dmitri revealed that he wasn't just an ordinary man. He was actually a scientist who had invented a machine capable of traveling to parallel universes. However, as he explored different realities, he discovered a devastating truth. In nearly every universe, a deadly disease had destroyed life as they knew it. After years of searching, Dmitri finally found a parallel universe that was 7 years behind their own timeline. In that universe, the disease was only beginning to spread. Dmitri's voice cracked as he explained that this disease had taken his daughter Daisy, and he was determined to stop it from happening again. Dmitri believed Chris was the key. Together, they could travel to the past in this other universe and stop the disease before it became unstoppable. Chris hesitated at first, but quickly realized he could make a difference. He already knew the mistakes his version in this other universe would make. If he could prevent them, he might save countless lives. With this understanding, Chris agreed to Dmitri's plan, and Dmitri prepared to send him back. The story shifted to show another version of Chris in this parallel universe. Here, Chris lived a peaceful life with his wife Anna and their young son. He worked as a researcher at a university, focusing on finding cures for various diseases through plant-based experiments. Despite his passion, Chris often felt frustrated with his boss, Mr. White, who rarely approved funding for his work. One evening, as Chris worked late at home, his phone rang. The call came from an unknown number. The voice on the other end seemed friendly but mysterious. They told Chris they were impressed by his research and understood how undervalued he was at his university. They wanted to meet him to discuss his work and offer their support. Chris, while sitting at a bar, encounters Jim, a former employee of a major pharmaceutical corporation called Trials. Jim, intrigued by Chris's academic background, offers him an enticing proposition: leave his university position to work for Trials. The offer includes a significant salary increase and access to a state-of-the-art laboratory. Chris finds the proposal intriguing but is hesitant. Jim, sensing his uncertainty, hands over his business card and encourages him to think it over. Chris returns home, conflicted, pondering the potential opportunities and ethical implications of joining such a powerful corporation. Meanwhile, in a parallel universe, an older version of Chris, 7 years ahead in time, arrives in this reality. This future, Chris is haunted by the decisions he made in his own universe. He had accepted Trials' offer, handed over his groundbreaking research, and watched in horror as the company prioritized profit over responsibility. The disease he had worked to cure was allowed to mutate unchecked, rendering his antidote ineffective. His universe was ravaged, and billions suffered. Determined to prevent history from repeating itself, future Chris vows to stop his younger self from making the same catastrophic mistakes. To set his plan in motion, future Chris visits a nearby library, seeking out Dmitri, the scientist who had originally helped him travel between universes. Locating this universe's version of Dmitri, Chris explains his situation, revealing the truth about his journey from a parallel reality. He emphasizes that his universe is 7 years ahead and warns Dmitri of the impending disaster if events are not altered. Initially, Dmitri is skeptical, dismissing Chris as delusional. But Chris persuades him by sharing personal details about Dmitri's daughter, Daisy, information only the other universe's version of him could know. He explains that Daisy has already contracted the deadly disease in his universe, though it is still in its early stages here. With the antidote Chris developed, there is still hope to cure Daisy and halt the disease before it mutates beyond control. Dmitri asks Chris why his version from the other universe didn't come himself and why he sent Chris instead. Chris explains that he created the antidote and he's the only one who can save Earth from the disease. Chris then describes the symptoms of the disease, including distinct marks that form on the neck of infected people. Dmitri dismisses him as crazy and leaves. On his way home, Dmitri hears breaking news about a deadly new disease spreading globally. As the symptoms are described, he realizes they match what Chris had said. Realizing Chris might be telling the truth, Dmitri decides to go back and find him. Meanwhile, Chris is in his university lab, excited to see his hard work paying off. He has successfully grown plants capable of curing various various diseases. He shares the news with his supervisor, Mr. White. However, instead of celebrating, Mr. White claims that both he and Chris should share the credit for the research since he's in charge. To Chris's frustration, Mr. White not only plans to take credit, but also orders him to stop the research. Worse, Mr. White confiscates all of Chris's work, ensuring it can't be published elsewhere. Angry and feeling betrayed, Chris calls Jim, the man from the pharmaceutical company, and agrees to join trials. However, Jim says Chris must bring the research papers from the university lab. When Chris questions why, Jim reveals that he knows the plant research is groundbreaking and valuable. Jim argues that the work is Chris's alone, so there's no harm in taking it. He also points out that if the university keeps the papers, they could patent the research, cutting Chris out entirely. Since Chris has the access codes to the lab, Jim assures him it'll be easy to retrieve the papers without suspicion. Frustrated and desperate, Chris agrees. Late at night, after his wife Anna has gone to sleep, he sneaks out to the university lab. At the same time, future Chris and Dmitri arrive at the lab, knowing exactly what the younger Chris is about to do. Future Chris explains to Dmitri how his younger self is about to give the research papers to a private pharmaceutical company. He warns that the company will hoard the antidote, allowing the disease to spread unchecked so they can profit from it later. By the time the antidote is released, the disease will have mutated, rendering it useless. Chris keeps his promise and prepares an antidote for Dmitri's daughter, Daisy. Before leaving the lab, he writes a warning on a paper toy and leaves it for his younger version, advising him not to give the research papers to the pharmaceutical company. However, the injury on future Chris's leg begins to hurt again, and Dmitri helps him. As predicted, this universe's Chris arrives at the lab to steal the research papers. Sensing his presence, future Chris and Dmitri hide. Younger Chris discovers the warning note from his future self and hesitates, realizing he might be making a grave mistake. Dmitri, pretending to be a cleaning worker, questions why Chris is at the lab so late. Caught off guard, younger Chris leaves without taking the papers. Meanwhile, the pain from his injury causes future Chris to faint. When he regains consciousness, he finds himself in Dmitri's house, where Daisy stands before him. Dmitri explains that he brought him home after finding him unconscious. While examining Chris's leg, Dmitri discovered a tracker embedded in it, likely placed there by the Dmitri from Chris's universe. This revelation shocks both of them, raising questions about whether the other Dmitri has ulterior motives. Their conversation is interrupted when they notice Daisy showing symptoms of the disease. Chris quickly applies the antidote to the marks on her neck and assures Dmitri that she will recover. Grateful, Dmitri agrees to take Daisy to school, and the two discuss how saving her might have changed the course of events in this universe. Chris reflects on seeing Anna and their son in this reality, though Dmitri reminds him that this Anna is not his wife. Despite the bittersweet reminder, Chris remains committed to helping save this universe. When they return to Dmitri's house, they discover the window has been broken and the cupboard ransacked. Realizing something is wrong, Dmitri turns to find another version of himself standing in the room. This parallel version confronts them and, without hesitation, attacks, killing this universe's Dmitri in front of Chris. The story takes a dramatic turn when Dmitri reveals his ultimate plan. He admits that his goal was always to save this universe from the deadly disease, while eliminating his counterpart to take his place. Dmitri confesses that his own universe was destroyed long ago, leaving him with nothing to return to. By staying here, he can live a better life with Daisy. Dmitri explains that he hadn't shared this plan earlier because he knew Chris wouldn't agree. The tracker he implanted in Chris's leg was part of his scheme to follow him to Daisy and ensure she received the antidote. Now, with Daisy saved, Dmitri intends to settle in this universe as if he belongs here. He urges Chris to accept this new reality, arguing that since they are saving this universe, they deserve the happiness it offers. Chris is stunned by Dmitri's betrayal, but listens as Dmitri insists they must bury his counterpart's body quickly to avoid suspicion. After the burial, Dmitri hands Chris some money and a gun, suggesting that he should do the same, kill his younger self, and take his place. Dmitri reasons that by replacing their counterparts, they can live happily while continuing their mission to protect this universe. Meanwhile, the younger Chris from this universe is spending time with his family. When Jim from the pharmaceutical company approaches him, asking if he stole the research papers, Chris recalls the warning left on the toy. He firmly tells Jim he won't work for them and leaves, refusing to be bought. Watching Chris walk away, Jim makes a phone call to someone else, hinting at further plans. At the same time, future Chris cuts his hair and makes himself look identical to this universe's Chris. He goes to Anna, who is feeling unwell, and convinces her to accompany him to the lab, where he claims he can help her. Although Anna finds his behavior strange, future Chris reassures her of his love and convinces her to trust him. Reluctantly, she agrees to go with him. Back at home, the younger Chris from this universe notices Anna is missing. As his baby sleeps, he finds the toy with the mysterious warning again and starts to wonder who could have written it and what they know. Growing suspicious, he decides to head to the lab to investigate. At the lab, future Chris has successfully prepared the antidote and administers it to Anna, ensuring her safety. Just as he finishes, Mr. White, Chris's supervisor, arrives and questions why they are in the lab so late. Sensing something amiss, Mr. White begins searching for the antidote. Future Chris pulls out a gun to stop him, but it's revealed that Mr. White is not alone. Jim from the pharmaceutical company is with him. Jim smugly explains that after Chris refused to cooperate, he bribed Mr. White to help steal the research papers and antidote. Future Chris tries to reason with Mr. White, warning him not to assist Jim's company. He explains that their greed will ultimately destroy the world, a revelation that leaves Mr. White stunned. However, Jim intervenes, threatening to kill Anna if Chris doesn't hand over the antidote samples. Reluctantly, Chris lowers his gun to protect Anna. At that moment, Mr. White, now realizing the truth of Chris's warnings, grabs the antidote samples and attempts to flee. Jim, however, shoots him, killing him instantly. Seizing the opportunity, future Chris fires at Jim, killing him in turn. Moments later, the present Chris arrives at the lab, drawn by the sound of gunfire. Inside, he finds Anna trying to help the wounded Mr. White, while Jim lies dead nearby. Before Chris can make sense of the chaos, future Chris reveals himself. Future Chris, holding his own injuries, steps forward and explains that he is from a parallel universe where everything was destroyed by a deadly disease, including his version of Anna. He confesses that he had initially planned to kill his counterpart and take his place in this world. However, Anna intervenes, stabbing future Chris to stop him. Now severely injured, future Chris collapses. Despite the opportunity, present Chris chooses not to shoot future Chris. Instead, future Chris begins to explain everything: how his world was ravaged, how his Anna died, and how he's worked tirelessly to save this universe. He assures present Chris that this universe is now safe and Anna will remain unharmed. Acknowledging his time is running out, future Chris bids farewell to Anna and his counterpart. He expresses satisfaction that, while he couldn't save his own world, he has given this one a second chance. With his mission complete, future Chris leaves, deciding to spend his last moments on a beach, remembering his Anna. The story ends with present Chris holding his family close, grateful for the chance to live the life that future Chris sacrificed so much to protect. How did you enjoy this story? Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible tales. Thank you for watching.